Yeah, that is absolutely amazing. And so Michelle, I'm sure, needs no further introduction. We've sent a lot of material, but I just wanted to say, Michelle, I love what you're doing. I've got your campaign backdrop color on my virtual display, and I love it because purple is actually what happens when you mix red and blue. And I really believe that's what we need, right? There should not be red or blue. There should only be purple. And if I can make a suggestion, I think one of your campaign slogans should be Michelle Wu, making America grape again. Okay, that sounded better when I was rehearsing it in my mind. But anyway, let's move on. At this point, I'd love to introduce Brian Abrams, former chair, who knew Michelle from before. And maybe Brian, you can tell us a little bit about how you met Michelle and how we reconnected with Michelle to the Presidential Scholars Program.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Thrilled to be here. And I'm Brian Abrams, 1996, Colorado. And I might even turn it into a question for Michelle if I could, because, Michelle, I think your story is so many different stories, but I think for all of us, it's very much a presidential scholars story. And I think it's a story of serendipity, how, one thing can lead to the next thing, can lead to the next thing. And I think the scholar has played a role in that for you. So I would love if you're willing to just share with us a little bit about the serendipitous path that led you to where you are today.
Sure. And it's, well, first, I'm just so grateful to everyone for taking the time to be part of this, and hope to stay connected. I was very proud early on to be part of relaunching the medallion with John Knox, and to be very involved in the early stages of reviving that. So it's great to see so many people and from all different classes and generations still involved. As Brian kind of hinted at, I never ever thought that I would be speaking to a group of strangers one day about being an elected official. I'm the oldest child born to immigrant parents, and I never ever saw anyone who looked like me in government and politics, never met an elected official, never crossed my mind that this is what I could be doing one day. As I was graduating from Harvard, met Matt Anestis, who helped connect me to some opportunities at BCG as a first post-graduation job, helped talk me through so many issues and that time in my life, we had some unexpected challenges when my mom began to experience a mental health crisis, and helped me work out what I should do then and this and that. And eventually, when it ended up that my mom would need longer term care, I wanted to bring the family back to Boston, came back to Harvard for law school. Matt connected me to someone, Heather, who connected me to Nick Metropolis, who connected me to Mayor Menino. And that was the only way I got a foot in the door as a law school intern for the mayor of Boston. Now that I am in this role and seeing just how the world works, unfortunately, sometimes in politics, I know that there was no way that just as a well-meaning intern wanting to apply for that job that I would have otherwise ended up having that connection. So it really is through the incredible network here and the generosity and mentorship of people that I even had doors open for me that I never dreamed were ones that I should ever walk through.
Michelle, that is amazing. And again, at this point, I'd love to bring in Matt, because I know, when Matt and Brian and John were really setting up, there was also this dream, right? That presidential scholars, we meet at this event in DC, and then we kind of lose contact. But there was this greater dream of, hey, let's create a community around presidential scholars. And Matt, I'd love for you maybe to talk a little bit about, or comment, maybe that time of you working with Michelle, all the work that she did to lay the groundwork effectively for what is the current Presidential Scholars Foundation that we see today.
Yeah, absolutely. And first of all, it is so delightful to see you, Tom, and Michelle, and Brian, and John, and so many people that I love and adore. And Michelle, one thing I would say is, so first of all, the wonderful thing about the Pres Scholars Network is that it's a group of people from all kinds of places throughout all stages of their career. And one of the privileges that I had as being part of this was actually spending time with folks for whom I could at times play a mentor role, but quite frankly, they played a inspirational role for me. And Michelle is being a little bit modest in that I went back and found all our old emails from back at the time and sort of read through the connections. And the reality is Michelle's one of those people that whoever you introduce her to loves you for introducing them to them. So each conversation where she was going through her life, you'd take her in at BCG and BCG loved me for sort of that connection. Is like each element, it was just here's someone who is just going to inspire and enrich everyone around them. And every time she did, and the reading through the aspects of what she had, it's just one of those ones where I am privileged from being able to spend the time with her and around her. And again, seeing what she's done with that. And looking back at that time, what she also did was she was also always one of those ones who was leaning in to create. We did the Pres Scholar thing back at that time without anything resembling a budget and not nearly the kind of impact and oomph that Brian and John and Tom had taken it to. And so we were usually just doing it sort of on our backs, where we effectively maybe we get BCG to host something or get people to do it, but it was really sort of people leaning in, and it was always Michelle leaning in and creating and evolving. And Michelle, for sort of your question, is to you for a second. One, so delightful to see you, and I'm so excited about where you are. You have done such a good job of continuing to mentor other people and bring people around and sort of connect and create sort of those communities. Again, this is one that has all these different areas. I'd love your thoughts on both how you've mentored other people, how you've thought about sort of that and sort of connecting in as you've sort of crafted your career. Because this is a network that is really valuable in that way that I think some people have actually done quite well. And again, you are the person that a lot of people, myself included, now look to for inspiration and mentorship.
No, and thank you, Matt. Matt, again, has just been so many pivotal steps in my life. He had advice, he had connections, he took the time to listen and to offer some insights. And for me, as someone who grew up really, first generation in this country, I applied for colleges all on my own, wrote my parents sort of file, the letters that your guidance counselors needed to be able to write their recommendation because of language barriers. And so I had no sense, no networks to walk into, no experience, no sort of adult figures who could help pave the way in that way. And so for me, I've always thought that, there's a couple things that I try to tell younger folks as they're trying to make decisions, right? Think about people, think about plans, think about the politics of it all, because you can't escape that no matter what industry you are in. And so really getting to know everyone in your organization, not just who you think you need to, impress to move up within that, or not just who you're directly working for, but everyone has an incredible journey that they've walked. And I've learned and gained so much from speaking with those who are, the administrative staff in certain spaces and mentors when it comes to parenting and other experiences that I've had to have, setting a plan and ensuring that you're just thinking a little bit ahead of, okay, what would the next 6 months look like? What would the next 3 years look like? Of course, everything can go up in the air at any minute, which is something that I've lived very intensely. But taking the time to map that out and share that with others who might be interested in a similar pathway. And then I really want to emphasize that I grew up believing that politics was something I never would have to deal with. My parents, I didn't realize until much later in my life, intentionally shielded me from it. We never discussed it at the dinner table. We didn't talk about current events. And it wasn't until later that I realized, it's not that my parents didn't care about what was happening in the world. It's not that they didn't know or weren't following it. In my family's multi-generational immigration story, my immigrant parents themselves were also children of immigrants. both sets of my grandparents had fled mainland China in the midst of civil war over to the island of Taiwan. And so in my family tree, politics was corruption and famine and fear and war and the reason why family members had been left behind. And so I was determined. I never set foot in political events in college, didn't get involved with the Harvard Dems or anything like that. And I'm now at a place where, through my family's experiences, raising my sisters as my mom was struggling, raising my own kids now, politics touches every aspect of your daily life, whether or not you are an elected official, whether or not you're actively working on a campaign. It's part of organizational structure. It's part of policy making. And so everyone has a role to play in that, especially now in this moment where we just came back from the brink of our democracy really fraying down to the last threads. And so I just encourage everyone to step into your leadership role in your community. It doesn't, again, I hope you run for office. Let me know if you do. I will be happy to provide any sort of feedback or support. But it's following the news and getting involved. It's chairing the board of an organization. It's plugging in with the presidential scholars and creating spaces for others to connect. So that's what I've learned most of all, is that when you bring people together around something that people care about, could be a school issue, could be a park, could be voter access, voting access, that in and of itself is a community good. And the more people we have connecting to each other in a time when we are so siloed with social media, with this 24-hour news cycle, that interaction is most valuable of all.
Michelle, that's amazing. Look, I think what you just highlighted, if I could just summarize, is just one. I just want to highlight to everybody, Michelle was doing and giving back so much to the community, as you can tell from her work, as Matt and Brian and John have pointed out, already leaning in, contributing when she could, right? So this was part of her kind of character even before she decided to run for mayor of Boston. And so I think that's the first key takeaway. The second one is Michelle's also talked about, for all the presidential scholars here, we've done very well, academically, but again, support networks. A lot of us sometimes, we met each other for a week. I mean, I always used to laugh when I was embarrassed to say that I was a presidential scholar, because people used to say, oh, what are you, this is the president of the nerd club. And, things like that, you never talked about it, but then you realize that we have an impressive, powerful support network for each other if we only decide to make it a community, right? And to lean in and help one another. So again, Michelle, what you just said there, I think it resonates and is so powerful. And now the third point, I want to transition, and I just want to make sure, is Dave Zoll there? Dave, are you there?
Yes. Hello.
All right. Hey, so okay, right now with serious stuff, your professional networks, and we're going to get into that, but presidential scholars, it can not only help you, right, in your career, your networking, reaching out for mentors, it can also help you in your personal life. And the presidential scholars also played an important role in Michelle's romantic life. And I've got a special guest here, Dave Zoll, who's also class of 2003 and was classmates with Michelle at Harvard, class of 07. And Dave, I don't want to say anymore. I'm going to turn it over to you. You got to share this story.
Yeah. Thanks. First of all, thanks for inviting me to this. It's awesome to see you. Michelle, Tom, I just met you. Hi, Michelle. And I think I'm supposed to tell you about this other network benefit that being part of this community can have. So I guess I'll start with, Michelle and I were classmates in college, and it was my birthday, my senior year. And so my friend Jimmy comes from Yale to hang out, and he brings his friend's Connor. And I was like, oh, cool, he's a cool dude. And we were talking about stuff, and he stayed with us, and he was like, cool guy, had my birthday party. And then I think the next day I get like a email or a call from Jimmy, and he's like, yeah, so So like Connor wants to know, like, what's this girl Michelle's deal? Like, what's up with this? And then I was like, I mean, what's he want to know? Like, I can tell him anything he wants. Like, I know her really well. So then I don't know how this happened, but we ended up. Oh shoot, did I freeze? I totally
Yeah, you
froze.
froze
didn't
for a
I?
second there. The most dramatic part.
Well, yeah.
Please.
Part. Yes, I'm back. Okay, basically, I get a message from Jimmy. He's like, Connor wants to know. So somehow I end up talking to Connor on AIM. For those of you who weren't like alive back then, that was AOL Instant Messenger. And so like we're like, it's like nighttime and we're like two like boys like talking about girls on AIM or whatever. But yeah, he was like, what's she like? And I just talked her up and I said she's the best. And that was it. The rest is history. They met up again. Also, correct me if I misremember any of these details, but yeah, I think that was it. And like they met up in November again for the Harvard Yale game, and that's it. Game over. So anyway, everybody reach out. Right? It's pandemic. You know, everybody's thinking about it. We're on lockdown. Presidential scholars. Anyway.
Dave, that's a great story. Unbelievable. Michelle, we got to get your take on that. Is Dave's reminiscing? Is that correct? Is that accurate?
I mean, I didn't see a lot of that side of things. So Dave is part of a small group of people that I walked onto campus knowing, because we had met not only at the Presidential Scholars sort of, you know, all the multiple nights that people were there, but got to go on a trip together with a group to China right before school had started. And we all, I you know, scattered to different places, but it was an incredibly important sort of anchor point for me in my social life and having friends and knowing people. So yeah, Dave took me to multiple we went to Elliott Fett together. We did a lot. Has been just, I'm really grateful for him as someone who was in my life. And yeah, so this is the only reason why I ended up with someone from Yale is because of Dave's stuff.
And so, Michelle, what house were you in at Harvard?
I was in Courier House. So shout out to all the quadlings on here.
Any quadlings? Raise your hand. Okay. And so, Dave, you were at Elliott House, correct?
Yeah, not the quad.
Okay. All right. So, River House guy. Excellent. Hey, so maybe Michelle, through that, and maybe just for those of us who don't know, Connor, and Connor, maybe talk a little bit about what happened there and then your family life. You've got 2 young kids. What's that like? You know, balancing kind of family, you know, young children, running for mayor.
Yeah, it's you know, I think the point where Dave's story ended then went into a lot of unexpected territory in my life. Right around that time, my mom was beginning to show signs of mental illness, and I didn't talk about it with anyone for a long time. Just the sense of stigma and shame. And by the time I was, you know, maybe 6 months into my job at BCG, I had to tell Matt, right, it's not sustainable. My mom was not eating much, not sleeping, experiencing delusions and paranoia. My 2 sisters were still home, and there's kind of a relatively big age gap between myself and my youngest sister, who's 12 years younger than me. And so my little sisters were 10 and 16 at home at the time. And my mom was not able to take care of herself for a while, much less my siblings. And so I left BCG, went back to Chicago, or suburban Chicago area where my family was, and everything was kind of out the window of everything I had, you know, to the extent that I had plans or a job or anything. It was really about surviving the day to day, like getting my mom to even acknowledge that something was wrong. And by the time we got her to even accept treatment, the first diagnosis was late onset schizophrenia. She had multiple hospitalizations. I know what the feeling of staying up all night in the emergency room with her, just waiting, praying for a mental health bed to open up, of trying to get my sisters out the door to school with all the trauma happening at home, of opening a small family business to try to keep us going, and then running into one hoop after another with city government to try to do that. I went from someone who had been completely shielded from government and politics to that bursting and needing to, in some ways, fight against government and politics for what my family needed at almost every angle that I was turning. And so I became very angry about that, even more so when I spoke with others in a similar situation, realized how universal these experiences were, from all the small business owners down the street, having to fight just to get the chance to do something that would help their family and the community, of other parents and guardians in the school system, of caregivers trying to support family members. And so, I thought, well, I'll end up in government. I'll be on the other side of the counter. I will make it easier for people. I'll be chief of staff to some, permitting agency head person. And it really wasn't until I walked into law school at Harvard and had Elizabeth Warren as a contracts law professor, that by my third year of law school, she was running for the United States Senate. And I just asked how I could help. I showed up at office hours and said, what can I do? Would love to support. She put me to work as one of the first 2 people on the ground in Boston. And by the end of that campaign, I was running the campaign's statewide outreach focused on communities that have traditionally been left out of politics, multilingual families, immigrant families, any community that was defined more by identity than by geography. And that was really the first inkling that it's not just about policy, right? It's not just about getting people with energy inside government, but needing to get it right in the politics too, of bringing more people into the process and changing it and making commitments and driving that momentum through the election to actually delivering change in office. And so that was a blur in my life of so much happening all at once. And, now in some ways, running for mayor this year and last year has really been the first moment in my life where, for a long time, family stuff is pretty quiet, right? I had either been managing some major crisis with my mom's mental health, or trying to support my sisters as they were graduating from school and struggling in different phases of it, or pregnant or nursing or this. And so now everybody has a job, everybody's doing well. My mom lives with me. She's so much better these days. I send my 2 boys downstairs to have breakfast with her every morning, and all I have to do is run for mayor. So it's been a whirlwind, and I'm so grateful because there've been so many people who have come in and out of my life, right? Folks who I have, like Dave, I have in a different world, Dave and I would be talking every day, and like being drawn away from friends and normal 20-something life to basically raise a family has been incredibly complicated. But I'm now getting to this part of things where it feels like on the personal side, things are going well, and hopefully I'll get to reconnect and plug back in with everyone from Presidential Scholars, maybe after this election, one way or the other.
Well, fantastic. And then, hey, just to close the story with Connor. So then, what happened there? Like, when did you met Connor? And this is great. And I'm sure he was, again, you talk about this very challenging period. I also want to hear the story about you opening up a tea shop.
Yeah. So,
and then what happened? You fill us in. And then I know there was a big role here that also Matt and Brian played as you were in that period and decided, hey, I'm not going to do consulting. Yeah. I went through this. And again, there's a lot of questions here, but that period in your life, how has that informed your outlook and made you someone who's more empathetic to the needs of your constituents? Because that's something most of us don't go through. How has that shaped your view? So maybe 2 parts of that question is what happened with Connor? We want to know that. And then that experience you had, the tea shop, what the challenges you went through, how did that shape you and will make you a better leader, I think, for the citizens of Boston?
Yeah, so I will just say we have hosted, I don't know, Julia from my team could probably tell me the exact number. We've probably hosted 50, 100, hundreds of events, I'll say, since the beginning of our campaign. And not one of them have I revealed the details of my marriage and relationship. So this is a first. It's really a story of social media. I think the early days when Facebook was brand new. I don't know if anyone remembers so Facebook had started at Harvard and expanded to colleges from there. This was back in the days where there was still a poke feature where you could press a button and it would just poke someone, and it was supposed to be just not as formal as sending a message, but trying to get their attention. Very college. And so after we met I actually don't remember talking to Connor at all at Dave's birthday party. So Connor remembers that. I have no recollection whatsoever of that. It wasn't until the Harvard Yale game that he had come back to visit with his roommate, who was Dave's high school friend. That
Jimmy, right?
Jimmy, yep.
Jimmy.
That we had the first interaction that I remember. And then there was, I don't know if it was the poke feature on Facebook or just messages, but that was the way of staying in touch and staying connected. And, after graduation, there was, in this period of time, as I was trying to sort out my sort of personal life unraveling with my mom and my sisters going through so much, and just starting a brand new job in some ways and loving pieces of it, that I got to be with such smart people and learning so much. I had nowhere else to really get advice except for folks like Matt. And so it was incredibly foundational for me to be able to reach out and say, what should I do? Right. And Matt was like, here's the options. You could transfer to the Chicago office while you are still with your family. You could, try to tough things out and stay in Boston. And he was basically there for letting me know that no matter what I chose, it was going to be okay. And that was something that I didn't know that I needed to hear so much as I actually did.
Well, and actually, as having watched you go through it, it was, Michelle is just one of those, you inspire all around you, and watching you make the decisions that you needed to make for yourself and for your family, and both persevere and address things in a real way, and do it with the attitude of this is the world. It was you've every step of the way you're just an inspiring person as you sort of lean into things and are real about them, as you are here. I don't know if you've seen the chat, but the chat is just listening to you and just feeling uplifted by the honesty and the forthrightness and the realness of who you are in addressing sometimes wonderful things and sometimes difficult things. And that's it's inspirational to see.
Along those lines, again, we have so many, presidential scholars. There's, we're close to 8,000 alumni now, Michelle. And we're one of the few groups that has broad representation across every state in America. We're cross-generational, right? We just celebrated our 55th anniversary 2 years ago. And again, when President Johnson set up the program, I thought he was very visionary. We're one of the few groups where there's an equal number of women as well as men who are part of this program. And Michelle, I just thought what you said that really struck me was, as you were going through that phase, I think all of us here, sometimes we chase these goals. We chase these, whether it's material goals or whether it's status, prestige. I think for a lot of us coming out of college, you're attracted by, big investment banks, big consulting firms, big law firms, the best medical schools, the best research institutions, what have you. But when you made that transition to decide, hey, I'm kind of going to get off this track and instead choose a path of public service, what was that like? And how difficult was that? Or was it not difficult?
So I think in some ways the actual first biggest step was choosing to just say, I need to do what I need to do for my family. At that moment, my parents' marriage had basically unraveled. My mom was becoming a single mom, and with everything happening at home, there was no one else. And I remember the call from the first call, the very serious call from my sisters that made me immediately go and book a plane ticket to go home. They were explaining to me that my mom had started, and we had been seeing signs of paranoia for a while, right? My graduation from Harvard was basically the last public event that she came to. And even then there was a lot, I was terrified because there was a lot of, you could see starting to see some compulsive behaviors and things of like, okay, are all my friends' parents going to notice, right? Are this and that. But it was still mostly, it was functional, right? She could go about her day. She could take my sisters to school and make sure everyone was okay. But it got to the point where there was some alcohol involved, right? As self-medication. There was, my mom was starting to hear things that no one was hearing. And she's a woman who was incredibly tough, right? Survived so much in her own life before immigrating and then as an immigrant. And she always told me growing up, right? If you see someone in trouble, you do not walk away from that person. You get in there, you figure out how you can help. And so when she started hearing people crying out for help, she was going to go do something about it, even if everyone around her told her that it wasn't real and no one else could hear it. And so she started running out in the middle of the night to try to help, sometimes to knock on the neighbors' doors at 3 a.m. and the police would get called. And so it became quite a frequent occurrence. And when I first got back home, of just hour by hour, where was she? Was she running outside? How did we get her back? And just to try to ease the delusions a little bit. And so that step of, okay, now what do I do? Right. I was on leave. I was taking the family medical leave protection to be home just to see what was happening. And it was worse than I ever could have imagined. And so eventually it was just, okay, I'm going to go back to Boston, get my things and come back permanently. That was the scariest part of I think especially when you are those of us who were kind of presidential scholar mindset, I'll say, tended to be people who worked really well, reaching for goals and having a plan and knowing how to reach the next step. And this, for the first time, was no sense of, okay, I'm on a track to do this or that, of just, I need to survive. And I took the severance package that I had from BCG, some funding, decided I was going to do something that I thought would help my mom a lot, because one other thing she had said to us growing up is that if she stayed home to raise 4 kids, and she would always joke about one day wanting to retire from being a stay-at-home mom when we were grown up and be able to do what she wanted to do, which was have a job and to work. And she was going to run a little tea shop because loose leaf tea was such an important part of her daily routine. And so I kind of naively thought, okay, it feels like this crisis came on really fast. Maybe she'll snap out of it just as quickly as it seems to have happened. If I just get this business up and running for her, then I'll pass it back to her. I'll go back to my pathway. I'll, resume my life that I was living. And I threw everything into that business, the funding that I had saved from BCG, my time. And it was also a way to be able to have my sisters with me and to do this as a family. And everything that I had planned out, right? My beautiful PowerPoint presentation of how much we would charge and all the research we had done, all the T's and taste testing, and when the Gantt charts would show that we'd get to open and earn this much revenue and break even, et cetera, et cetera. It all went out the window at the moment where I needed to get city permits. And so that part just was an incredible situation. Are there anyone else from Chicago on the call? No.
Raise your hand if you're from Chicago.
So I don't know if people remember this, but there was a moment, and I don't know what the situation is now, but there was a moment where there was a significant documented amount of corruption in Chicago's inspectional services department. And here I had graduated from Harvard. I had worked in business for a little bit in consulting, had my beautiful slide presentation. I had read the entire Chicago Municipal Code as it related to restaurant permitting. I was ready for my inspection. We could not get them to come inspect. They had just shut down the system to contact inspectors because people had been caught taking a bribe. And so the only way to contact them was to, you weren't allowed to email, call, or anything because they were worried that that was what was leading to the exchange of funds. You had to just fax a form to a number and then wait 2 weeks. And they said, if you don't hear back in 2 weeks, fax again and wait 2 weeks. And so for us, it was just fax after fax after fax, no response whatsoever, no way to have any sense of when, if, anything. All the Gantt charts are out the window at this point. And so we went to our local alderman who had office hours in the community, waited in line, had an appointment, explained that we were in his district. This is what was happening. The next day, we got a call back that the inspection was scheduled, right? So first lesson 101 on local politics. And then when the inspector came, again, I was very ready. I knew the drill. I had read all the regulations. And she said, she didn't even barely looked around and then said, I need to fail you. And I said, why are you failing me? Everything is, I please show me why. And she said, it's not you. I'm going to schedule a follow-up inspection in a couple of weeks. I will come back and you'll definitely pass then. But we just need to prove that we are, hitting our numbers, right? And then she said, and I need to stay here for another half hour because we now have GPS tracking devices in our phones to prove that we've been there doing the inspection for long enough. And so it was just eyes wide open about the way of the world, politics in a big city, but also, and for me, most importantly, the gap between someone being able to read and understand the rules on the books and actually seeing the reality of how that played out in community and on the ground. And so that was really an entry point into the sense that maybe I can do something about this. Maybe, as someone who grew up translating for my parents from English to Mandarin, this was another way that I could sense so many people needed translation and an advocate.
That is awesome. And I know we've got some questions because I know Michelle has a hard stop at 9. I'd love for this conversation to continue. But again, Natasha, have you curated some questions that maybe we can pass on from the audience here?
Yeah, for sure. I guess we can start with Amy Chen, class of 2013, Colorado. She asked, how have you most successfully interacted with people, politicians and not, who have disagreed with your policies and ideas? And what is one of your most successful tactics to engage with them to potentially change their minds?
Oh, it's
It is a great question. And I think it really gets at the core of one of the most fundamental parts of our democracy right now is that we have come through such division. Politics has become, in some ways, so toxic of a conversation. With great divides between people. And what I find, and again, I'm uniquely biased, I'm running for mayor, I love city government. I believe that the local level is really where we can bridge this and change the dynamic. What we see in our country right now is that people are more and more isolated, right? There's a fundamental breakdown in trust. Of people trusting government, people trusting the media, people trusting each other, or even knowing each other. If you compare the data that's been collected across the last 40, 60 years, we have come out of, but had hit the low point in measures of trust. We also know that people are more, have fewer friends and confidants than society reported 40 years ago. People are much less likely to spend regular time with their neighbors who live on their street, or even to know their names compared to a generation or two ago. And that has profound consequences for how we engage in policymaking, because government ultimately is about doing the big things that we can't do on our own, that the private sector can't accomplish just through the market. And it really relies on the sense that believing that when government acts, because we have bought into this collective solution generating force, that we believe that even if our own personal interest isn't immediately represented, ultimately we're still better off when we act in the collective best interest. But when trust has become so difficult to find, breaking down that feeling of, okay, I'm going to do this even though I don't see myself directly immediately represented, because I'm connected to my neighbors and those who live on the other side of the street. And that's what we need to build back. And so in the one-on-one conversations where there are disagreements, and I get them a lot because I am, let's just say, taking the boldest positions in the mayoral field in this race, pushing for us to act the most urgently. Ultimately, when you get past the buzzwords, when you get past the political sort of litmus tests, people all want the same thing, right? We all want our kids to grow up in a community that is safe and healthy and better off than we had. We all want our cities to be places where we can thrive all across the city and feel welcomed and accepted. And when you frame it like that, sure, you might diverge on what the immediate steps are or what the maybe unintended consequences might be that some people think will come out of certain actions, but grounding it in the values of what the long-term goals are is incredibly helpful for getting people to engage in what the short-term steps should be. And so I actually, my ideas have been called pie in the sky before, that I'm pushing for things that are unrealistic or climate, leading on climate, which feels like such an expensive endeavor that is so big, but we are running out of time, or we no longer have the luxury to do things in an incremental way for our kids, for our grandkids. We can't afford to wait. And so I think my model is always set the goalposts where they should be, right? Big and bold and long-term. And that changes the immediate conversation too, right? So a couple of years ago, I was roasted in Boston for pushing back when the public transit agency said it was time to raise fares again. They had raised fares over 40% in the span of 7 years, right? Just incredible burden on those who couldn't afford other options. And they said, time to have another raise. And I pushed back and said, we should no longer be talking about whether it's a 3% raise or a 6% increase in prices. Public transportation should be free because it is a public good, just like we treat public education, public parks, public libraries. We all benefit when we use it more, when anyone uses it more, and therefore we should remove barriers. I mean, you wouldn't believe the amount of controversy that caused. Yet, less than 9 months later, the very first city in Massachusetts had implemented fare-free public transportation, because my friend was mayor of Lawrence and kept giving me ideas of how we could do it in Boston. I said, well, you're the mayor, why don't you try it? And he said, okay, I will. And they've seen transformational results. Ridership going up by double digits, bus drivers who had driven the same routes for 20 years, meeting residents who had lived in the community for 20 years when they had never interacted before because people had had to ration their trips to the grocery store and walk and just opening up opportunity. And so by aiming there, by helping to reshape the conversation on what's possible through government and through our community, we really, you need to push through the conflict. Conflict is good. If you're not encountering conflict, you're probably not aiming for something that is getting us to where we need to go fast enough and strongly enough.
Hey, Michelle, we got so many questions and I'm cognizant on time, but I definitely do want to ask a question. I think that's also the elephant in the room, which is, given the current state of affairs in the US right now, with all that's going on with Stop Asian Hate, and I know you may not have chosen to lead this, but you've been kind of put in this position. And I think, well, Michelle, yeah, okay, I thought you were frozen there for a second, but it's almost like, you didn't necessarily choose this, but maybe history chose you with what's going on. Can you kind of address this, what your campaign means, especially in terms of relevancy to this particular moment, with also all these kind of, acts around Asian hate going on, and maybe, talk a little, because I know for many of us on this call, and for all of us, we should be concerned about that. What does that mean to you?
Yeah, we're still hearing so much fear and anxiety all across the community. I mean, we saw it when Chinatowns across the country and other Asian American communities were already devastated by the pandemic, even before the virus was spreading in the United States because of misinformation, racism, xenophobia fueled by the former president and calling it the Wuhan virus and really tying it to sort of scapegoating a certain country and connecting that to racism in America. And I go through this feeling too of what happens when my mom is out by herself, right? As an Asian American woman who also continues to live with mental health challenges. What we did early on in the pandemic was I reached out to some of my friends who are elected officials, Asian American elected officials who serve other concentrations of Chinatowns and other AAPI communities. And we set up a 5-part town hall series where really wanted to highlight the fact that this is not a new occurrence, unfortunately, for the Asian American community. There's been a cyclical history in this country of scapegoating from the Chinese Exclusion Act, right? The very first legislation targeting a specific ethnic group, excluding them from this country, all the way through Japanese internment, all the way through the hate crime murder of Vincent Chin and others, and post 9/11 discrimination against the Sikh community. We know that this is not new, right? There's been an acceleration and intensifying of it, but so much of it is connected to a sense of invisibility, of being perpetual foreigners in this country, and such a big gap between representation of our community in positions of visible leadership, government and politics and entertainment, and our population. And so, I shared earlier in a smaller group conversation that we have not had an Asian American woman mayor of a very large city in this country before, right? There are many, I think, stereotypes that layer into that. And this is certainly not why I ran. In fact, it might be more of a reason why I thought about not running than anything else. That as growing up as an Asian American girl, I would have thought that would have been a disqualifying factor in becoming a politician. And so there's an opportunity now to not only speak out against the racism and violence that's happening, but to ensure that we are connecting with other communities and not continuing to pit communities against each other, but really show that representation matters, and representation that includes and sees all of us.
Michelle, that is awesome. And again, at this point, and I'm hoping, Michelle, we have so many people want to ask more questions, but I am cognizant of time. And I have to do our obligatory plug. So at this point, can we pull up the slide? I just want to say, look, the comments.
Oh, wait, Tom, if I may, I just see that Aman has had his hand up. Can maybe squeeze in this one and then we'll do the.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Go ahead.
Oh, it's fine. It's so nice to see you again, Michelle. And I'm just floored because I was also leaning on Matt a decade ago, during times of family stuff. And it's just such a reminder of what this community can be. And I'm going to maybe get emotional also. Like, it's so clear, just even in this call, that we're all a little bit extra wired for sensitivity, for fairness, for service. And I think that actually means that in today's climate, we have to support each other as a community, as a presidential scholars community. We actually have to protect each other because we have these, that we are wired a little bit differently to the norm. My question for you, and given what you remember of me from a decade ago, this won't surprise you. Did your affiliation with the scholars give you a sense of political legitimacy? Did it help you feel more American at the time? The whole experience of being seen at the White House, getting the medal. It took me about 15 years to figure that out, and I wanted to know if you felt the same way.
So I think if I had had the chance to really talk to my parents about it, they would have 100%. I mean, just I remember it more from their perspective than from my own, right? For me, in some ways, I was so clueless then and so disconnected from politics that it was incredible to meet other young people from across the country. I had not had much exposure to it, and to see just the performances there, the talent, the wit. I was just soaking in the energy of all the talent and intellect and wit of everyone around me. I think for my parents, I remember, we didn't, our economic situation definitely sort of moved up as my dad got promotions and earned more and more. And usually it would be accompanied by a move to a new town where we would be able to access a better school district. I remember one of the first times that we sort of went on a family vacation and stayed in a hotel. It was a motel then. It was a camping trip because we could save money then, but there was, the one night that you needed to shower and all of that. And so on that road trip, I remember my parents, it was so special for us kids because we got to be in a place where other people were going to help, take care of the making the beds, and we jumped on the beds and all this stuff. And yeah, I remember before we left, my mom especially scrubbed down everything, right? Like wiped down every surface, made the bed, and I asked her, for the first time, we are somewhere where you're paying you're paying for a service where you don't have to do this. Why? And she looked at me and she said, I don't want them to think that Chinese people are messy, right? Slobs. And there was such a sense, I just remember that of my parents, especially constantly feeling like they stuck out and they've had the burden on their shoulders of, if they did something, everyone else who looked like us would feel that impact. And so I think from that perspective, being in those spaces, welcomed formally in government, there was no comparison. I can recall their mood that day. For me, it didn't sink in for a long time. It was about friends and just having fun. But I think you're absolutely right that for so many families, especially for some of us who came from immigrant families, that moment was the closest that they would get to that kind of, close proximity to that level of power and influence.
And being seen and recognized by your own government, like
Absolutely.
for the first time, but also at a formative time at age 18.
I couldn't have picked a better way to kind of, bring this to a close. And look, if we've got the slide, thank you so much for that. There's no better way to segue into this next slide, which is, look, if you believe and you want the presidential scholars to continue to bring you this type of high quality programming, and you've seen what this network, if we work at it, right? Networks don't happen if you don't do anything. But the turnout today, again, Michelle, thanks to you, this has been one of our best turnouts. The engagement has been fantastic.